she is like many of us actually. What do I say? A BE in computer science as well as an IIM Bangalore graduate, and has been in the IT industry as well as in the startup industry for a long, long time. And I must say that she is obsessed with customer behavior, if I can put it that way. And what we're going to talk about today is, we know startups tend to get into, time to market, how can I quickly get newer versions and things like that. But she's going to help us sort of give more perspectives around what do we need to do before we jump into a lot of development, right? So I'll hand over to Anuradha and I welcome you all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good evening, and thank you so much for waiting. I heard from Sandeep that you have a presentation scheduled for tomorrow, but you decided to stay back to listen to what I want to share. So I hope that you'll have at least some insights to carry back home. The reason why I chose this topic is that many of us, coming from engineering background, we just love to work on solutions. Any problem comes, our mind immediately starts to work towards the solution. But taking a moment to think about why we are talking about this problem and why we want to address this problem, right? So that is really going to help us a lot in the long run. So I'm speaking, talking about this from my own experience, and that's why I wanted to share a couple of case studies so that you can understand why it is important for a startup to spend enough time and energy in, talking about empathizing with your users and defining your problem statement, accurately. So that is what the scope of this talk is going to be. A few months back, I had an interesting conversation with a colleague of mine on innovation. So around that time, Common Floor has launched a new product called Common Floor Retina. So it's a virtual reality-based solution where you can just sit at the comfort of your home and look through different houses, a 360-degree view of the apartment, the locality, and so on. So I found this to be an innovation. I felt that this is going to save a lot of time for anybody who is in the house hunting business. Anybody who did house hunting recently? So, yeah. Settled, okay. Yeah, so just maybe not recently, maybe 5 years back, think about it. How much time you would have spent in going after houses, one after the other, looking at plans, and deciding on the house that you want to buy or you want to rent. So when we had this conversation, he said, my colleague said that this is not really an innovation. This is just an incremental idea. This is not really something radical. But at that point, I realized that for me, innovation means it's about the magnitude of the problem it solves. It's not just about the solution or how new or novel the solution is, but it's closely linked to the magnitude of the problem it solves, right? So at that time, I realized that innovation doesn't have a common definition to everybody. Each of us have our own definition of innovation, right? I think most of us would have heard of the story of elephant and the blind man, right? So the innovation is something that is not universal, but it is more personal. And take this context at at your customer's level. So when you are developing a product, you think this is innovative. Oh, this idea is new. But do you know whether your customer also shares the same enthusiasm and thrill of your new product, right? So that's why I wanted to tie the importance of why you need to invest significant time in understanding your customers, understanding the problem, and then coming up with a solution. So as I said earlier, for me, innovation is all about the magnitude of the problem, right? So looking at some of the examples from my own personal and professional life, I find these 4 companies to be innovative. You may not agree with me, but it's fine. But this is how I view innovation as. Similarly, take a moment to think about what are those products that have impacted your lives. be it your personal or professional life? What products made your life much more smoother, much more easier? So think about it from the problem that the product addressed to you. Paul Graham, in the essay, 18 Mistakes That Kill Startups. It's a wonderful essay. I highly recommend you take a look at it if you haven't done so already. So he says that you create wealth in proportion to how well you understand the problem you're solving, right? So he says that not just the problem, but it's also about a problem which is your own. So think about the areas where you are finding it frustrating. If you ask me, I find, commuting really, really frustrating. So I want to solve, if at all I come up with a startup idea, it would be, there are multiple areas, but this is one idea I definitely want to tackle. Because most of us spend so much of time in commute. Do you agree? How much of time, and especially with work and the MBA program, don't you wish that you get those 2 hours that you spend on commute every day to do something productive? So that problem really resonates with me, and I know that if at all I am going to invest time, I would invest in this. Steve Johnson, he writes a lot on product management. Again, check out his blog and articles that he has written on product management. So he talks about the role of a product manager. So a product manager must understand the customer's situation even better than the customer does. So the customer may just say, okay, this is how my situation is, but is there some other insight that you as a product manager can bring in? Now we have talked enough about innovation and the importance of understanding the problem space. How does it link to design thinking? So this quote from Mauro Porcini, he is PepsiCo's chief design officer. He says design thinking is not about aesthetics and the artifacts that you bring, but it's actually a strategic function to understand what the customer wants, what the customer's dreams are, and what he really wants, right? So this kind of links the previous discussion we had on how spending time and energy in understanding the problem space, how design thinking can be a useful tool or framework to help you unravel this problem space. Not just about understanding how is it going to help you, it is also going to help you create those wow moments for your customer, right? So there are 4 things whenever you are talking about a solution, you'll have to also understand these 4 aspects. Customer delight, what's going to delight your customers? What's going to make them go wow, right? And what would make their lives better, right? So these are the areas that, investing in understanding the problem will give you insights on. So I'm sure you're familiar with these 5 stages, and today's talk and the case studies that we are going to discuss is mainly going to focus on how you can empathize with your user, what are the best practices that you can follow, and how you can define the problem statement that will help you to, ideate properly and come up with relevant prototypes. How many of you have done this design thinking course in Coursera? Nice. So that's a very good course. I really loved it, and the examples that were shared were amazing. So Professor Dr. Jean Litka, she gives this framework, which is somewhat similar to the earlier framework. So here she talks about, before you even begin the process of, ideation, spend enough time on, what is the project scope, who are the stakeholders, and do your research and get those relevant insights before you even proceed on to your ideation stage. So any questions so far, or shall we move on to the case studies? Okay, great. So the first case study, I'm going to be talking about, how you can empathize with your user and what are the benefits you're going to get by, empathizing with your user. What is the process that we followed at MindTickle? So MindTickle is a sales readiness platform. I just wanted to get a quick understanding, how many of you interface with your sales teams? Okay. So what sort of interactions do you have with your sales team?
Generally, when I work for a software services company, so the kind of interactions what we have is to understand what customer is actually requesting for in terms of their particular requirements.
Right.
I'm part of a pre-sales team, so our job is to relate first gaps from the customer to the sales team and to the network.
Okay.
Just to understand what is their requirement
Right.
and then map these requirements into articulated as a form.
Okay. Okay. So whenever you're interfacing with your sales teams, you would want, especially if, given that we're talking about product thinking, when you're interfacing with your sales team, you need to ensure that as a product manager or as a product marketing manager, you need to ensure that the sales reps understand the value proposition. They don't just go and talk about how great your product is to, everybody, to each and every customer, but understand what the customer's business model is and what are the pain points that customer is facing and how your product or solution can help that customer, right? So the conversation has to be turned from more from a buyer perspective than from a seller perspective. So in order to enable this conversation, the sales reps or the sales executives need to be enabled with adequate information, relevant information, so that they can take these conversation forward and convince the customer that this is the product that is going to help him address a certain pain point. So that is exactly what Mindtickle helps, product companies to ensure that the sales reps are ready. So for any type of customers' needs that come in, the sales reps are always ready with the right information, the right context, and the right time. So the typical stakeholders who would be involved, right, in making a decision that whether do I need a sales enablement or a sales readiness product or not, there are these 4 different personas. So vice president of sales, a sales director or a manager, a sales enablement manager, and a sales rep. So many fast-growing startups in Silicon Valley have actually come up with a specific sales enablement manager role, where this person's job is to ensure that the sales rep has all the material in hand. So be it battle cards, be it competitive intelligence, be it market research, sales enablement manager must ensure that all this information comes to the sales rep at the right point of time. So if you look at each of these persona, so the first step we did in understanding and empathizing is to do a secondary research. So that was the first step, where we looked at each of these roles. We tried to understand what are their roles and responsibilities, what motivates them, and what are the challenges they face. How does a typical day look like for them, and how is their performance measured, right? So these are the different areas that we looked at, looking at their LinkedIn profile, looking at their past, job history, what are the kinds of activities that they do in social media, what sort of inputs they share on Twitter, in LinkedIn. So we first try to understand what each persona is, so that we are better prepared when we go and have the one-on-one conversations with them. The second step is the actual interviewing process. So here we looked at, to give you an example, I'm going to talk about one particular persona, which is the VP of sales of a fast-growing tech startup. So here, when we came up with the interviewing process, we decided we are going to follow 3 principles. One is we are going to be very open. It's going to be more like a conversation, not like an interview where we ask questions and they just answer, but it's going to be more like a mutual conversation. We are just going to listen and absorb the information. We are not going to interrupt. We are not going to bias the user towards the problems that we want to hear. That's very hard actually, but we have to consciously decide not to steer the discussion towards the problems we might want to hear. Maybe they might be talking about something totally different, which is disturbing their sleep, but we'll have to ensure that we listen and not interrupt, and also listen to subtle expressions and cues. It's difficult if you're having a phone conversation, but still you will be able to identify in what sort of questions do they talk passionately about, what sort of words they use. All this would help you understand this persona better. So we prepared an exhaustive list of questions. So a sample list, to give you an idea of how these questions are, not biasing the user. It's mainly a conversation to understand their sales process. So how is the sales team structured? How is the onboarding process work in your organization? What are the principles you follow? Do you have a structure? Who else are involved in this process? So again, this is primarily to understand how their sales onboarding process work. In order to give you an example, I have taken two sets of two questions to progress this discussion further. So here, a sales head or a VP of sales, he focuses on three different areas, right? One is how he can onboard the new sales hires, and the second is how he can make sure that the sales rep is updated with the right information. As you might know that the product releases are happening at such rapid pace these days that a product that was launched today might not be the same 2 weeks later, right? So the sales rep needs to be aware of what is coming up, what is, how does the positioning change, from the marketing team's collateral. So he has to be updated with all this information on an ongoing basis. And the third aspect is around coaching. So the sales head needs to identify what are the areas that the sales rep is good at, what are the areas he needs to improve in order to, decide on his quota, in order to ensure that he meets the quota. So this coaching aspect is what I'm going to be talking about. So the head of sales has the responsibility of coaching his sales reps. So he needs to first check whether the sales rep is ready to hit the ground. Is he ready to meet the customer? What is the criteria he uses to decide? And how does he identify those areas where he needs to coach? So in one such interview, I spoke to a lady who is a VP of a fast-growing tech startup in India. When she joined the organization, there was just one sales rep. So she expanded the team to currently about 8 sales rep, and they plan to double the headcount by the end of the year. So through my connection, I reached out to her and we set up some time to just have an open conversation. It was a very insightful conversation, and some of the aspects that we discussed, I sort of mapped it onto this empathy map framework. So as you can see, some of the quotes that she shared, she's very happy with the current process. It's really working well for her, and she's very proud that she took the ownership of expanding the team to 8 sales reps. And she was very proud of saying that I drive the entire process of sales onboarding. It's manual, it's taking me time, but it's working for now. So initially, that's how the conversation began. And as we progress through the conversation, asking more about, how does the teams interface together, towards the end of the conversation, she said, after talking to you, I'm feeling very scared. What's going to happen if a bus just hits me? So this is exactly what she mentioned. And though she was extremely busy, she said, I'm going to make time to look at your product. So do send me the trial accounts. I will take a look at it. So this gives you at least some idea on how a person who's confident, who wants to take ownership, and she says she is driving the entire process, but there is a certain element of concern that, too much of manual dependency on her, is it going to hurt the team as the team grows? And as I said earlier, she was a very busy lady. It was, very hard to get hold of her. So when we scheduled time with her, many times the call got cancelled and then we had to reschedule. So this again gives us an indication that she is extremely busy with so many other responsibilities, that if this onboarding or the coaching part is taken out of her list of things to do, she can be more productive, working on more strategic things for the organization. When we talk about this think quadrant, where we try to infer what are the ideologies that she has and how that is going to help us understand her beliefs. she wants to be treated as a very important person playing a key role in the organization. So the organization is growing rapidly. They are planning to double the sales reps. They are planning to hit, growth targets, high growth targets, but she wants to be a driving force behind that. So that gives you an indication that, if she takes up this new innovation or new product to the stakeholders, which is going to be the CXOs, and if we can convince her that this is going to solve this problem, she will push it forward. She will be the champion. And finally, on the feel quadrant, what are the sort of emotions and feelings that came out during this interview? So she is very happy, very proud with how she has set up so far, but there is an element of concern, there is an element of fear that she has in mind. And she wants to remove the manual dependency completely. So again, all these gives us insights on how we can position the product, how we can, what sort of product would help her be that go-getter, be that person who is going to drive the strategic change for the organization. So now that we discussed about coaching, let's take one particular activity that she does, the VP of Sales, which is testing the pitching skills of a sales rep, right? So here, typically what happens is that many organizations, both in sales and customer support, they have these mock sessions where, they would just call and say that, I'm a customer, this is what I'm looking for, and then the sales rep had to pitch, right? And if it is going to be a complex selling process, then they have mocks where the VP of sales and a peer salesperson sit together and they ask, they role play as though they are a customer, and they ask questions and they test how this person is pitching the product, whether he's able to, clearly spell out the value proposition or not. So how does this typically this work? So before starting the process, I'm sure you're aware of how the journey map works. We are just mapping out what are the sort of activities that happen during this process. So here, the first step she does is identify the different focus areas like value proposition, whether he's able to talk about product benefits, objections, pricing, etc. And then the VP of sales decides on the order, because a new sales rep may not be given closure targets in the beginning. He might just be asked to qualify new customers, and then as he progresses, he might be given more responsibilities towards closing and winning the deals, contracts, negotiation, and so on. So she decides on an order in which she wants to evaluate. And the third is, what are the sort of parameters or criteria that she should use, right? So if you're talking about a 30-second elevator pitch, how crisp it is. Does he spell it out with clarity? Does he have confidence? So these are some of the parameters based on which she would test. And finally, she schedules a time with the new hire and with a peer sales rep, right? So these are the steps that she does before this activity. And during the activity, the sales rep comes forward, he's given a scenario, and he does the pitching demo. And then the VP of sales or the head of sales, she notes down certain observations on what this person is good at, what he should improve. And then she gives the feedback. Sometimes she also gives a qualitative score so that there is a benchmark, based on which she can compare with other new sales hires. And finally, all three of them discuss and come up with a concrete action plan and a timeline for the actions to be taken. So once this is done, after this activity is over, they schedule a follow-up session. The VP of sales helps this person by sharing some additional collateral or material. So it could be a marketing collateral, marketing deck, it could be competitive positioning. So all the additional material that would help him to improve on these skills is shared by the head of sales. And finally, she follows up and checks if this person is improving in those areas or not. So this is the typical journey map of testing a pitching skill of a sales rep. So now that we have understood, the problem areas, how can you go about framing the problem, right? So here, some of the questions that we as product conceptualizers or product creators can think about is, how can we minimize this dependency? right? It's not just with one person, but multiple interviews gave us a similar indication that there is a lot of manual dependency on the VP of sales. And when we are devising the solution, yeah.
I don't quite agree with the flow. Probably you're used to different problem scenarios. Why are you defining the problem statement after you have identified the persona, done the journey map or empathy map, journey map, and all that, and then you're defining the problem? So what exactly, the problem statement is something which you're validating or you're trying to arrive at the problem statement?
Okay, so when we started out, there is a problem statement that we think or we hypothesize that this is existing in the sales space, right? So then we try to, it's not I wouldn't call it a problem statement creation, but more about defining the problem statement, defining the right problem statement, right? So how can you go about defining this right problem statement is when you would want to have those interviews and try to identify this is something that the market wants, right? So we know that there is a problem in the sales enablement space, but what is that exact problem? So that's what we are trying to arrive at. Any other questions?
So those 3 slides, a couple of slides earlier, are those linked together or are you talking about something? For example, we started with the empathy map and then the journey map is hooked up with the empathy map, right?
Right. Yeah. See, there are multiple areas that were discussed during the interview, right? So we talked about how they onboard new sales hires, how do they ensure that the sales reps are constantly updated with new information, and third aspect is how do they coach, how do they identify the areas that need to be coached. So this is the third area. So what I did was I have taken just the third part alone and came up with the journey map. So these are some of the questions that you could ask to define the problem statement. How can we improve the overall coaching experience of a sales rep, sales head? And most of the times these products are viewed as something that is intrusive. The sales rep might find a little bit more he might get a little bit more defensive because, oh, these guys are monitoring my performance. So we'll have to ensure that the product is viewed as something like it's more of a productive and it's going to improve my performance. So that's how it has to be viewed. So it shouldn't be viewed as a simple performance management system or appraisal or KRA monitoring system.
How do you arrive at that thing? Did you do any interviews with the
Yes. We did interviews with the sales reps also, and that is what we figured out, because they are already using a CRM using which they analyze whether they are closing leads, whether they are following up with the leads. So now this shouldn't become one layer on top. Okay, so this is how we went about identifying the problem. And after a lot of iterations, we spoke to many of our existing customers, and this is how we came up with the Missions product. So Missions is a product that helps to create those challenges, or it helps you to set those different soft skill tests, so which you can use for testing your communication, pitching, negotiation, and so on. So we understood that the VP of sales uses multiple parameters, so we incorporated that as evaluation parameters, and they give different scenarios, right, based on their market. And they also have maybe a standard pitch deck that they might use, which the sales rep might customize based on the context. So this is how the product was eventually developed. Okay, moving on to case study 2.
Sorry, before you move on,
Yeah.
another question. So you went to the empathy map and the problem definition, right? So this is from the perspective of one of the personas in their organization, right?
Right.
You have multiple people who would
Yes.
be, and not all of them would be buyers of your product, potentially, right? You might have multiple stakeholders.
Decision maker. Yeah. Right.
So the final buyer, right? So I can talk a little bit about that. So you obviously would have conducted interviews across the board with all
Yeah.
stakeholders.
Sure.
So your choice of problem definition was driven by what the buyer wanted, or Mostly buyer.
Mostly buyer. So VP of sales here, he is sort of the most important stakeholder. So most of our interviews were focused on getting the insights from VP of sales, because it's not just about making sales rep life easier, but it has to eventually equate to, you know, growth targets. How is a sales enablement or a sales readiness platform impacting my revenue targets, right? So that decision will eventually be driven by VP of sales.
So ultimately, the problem definition is driven by the buyer's problems, although you are taking input from all the other stakeholders.
Yes, 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 definitely.
How do you arrive at the personas?
Meaning,
How did you arrive at the personas?
okay, so here when we talk to, when we had this broad hypothesis that there is this problem where sales reps are not having the right information in hand, the onboarding process is ad hoc. We try to look at the structure of the organization. Who are the people who are involved, and what is the organization hierarchy? That's when we figured out that most of these startups are also hiring a dedicated sales enablement manager. So in India, it's still, you know, very nascent, but in Silicon Valley, in many European companies, there is a dedicated sales enablement manager who's responsible, whose performance is measured by whether the sales reps have those adequate information in hand or not. So again, this is not a, you know, exhaustive persona list, because when we talk about ongoing communication, there is a marketing director who's involved, right? There is a product manager or a product head who is also involved. The CXOs also are involved because they are setting the growth targets. But these are sort of the primary personas who are directly involved with the product. The other personas also have an influence, because when you talk about, say, a product manager, he needs to share product launch updates, he needs to share product specs, roadmap. If you talk about a marketing head, he needs to share about competitive intelligence, positioning, right? So all these, the other stakeholders also have an influence, but they would be classified as a secondary, at a secondary level.
A startup, I see like 4 or 5 roles only in the marketing, right? Usually, what will be the size of a startup in a Silicon Valley?
So in this case, we looked at startups about 30 to 40 30 to 40 employees with about 10 to 15 sales reps.
Really, that kind of a ratio? I mean, a startup size 40 people has got 10 people in the sales team.
Yes, in especially in B2B sales. Yeah.
From the perspective of a startup, assume a startup is in the space of B2C, B2C space. Okay, what they say and what they do are objective and can be recorded. But what they think and what they feel requires a lot more time of engagement. What if you don't have that much of a window to engage with your target segment?
Right. So that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about from a B2C perspective. Okay. Yeah.
The exercise that you did of the interviewing, was that before the ideation of the product? And if it was, what was the time difference between the interview process and the launch process?
I wouldn't say it was a sequential chain of events. We were ideating on how the product is going to be. We were doing some mock-ups. Around the same time, we were also doing these interviews. Our product was previously positioned towards, new hire onboarding, and we had a set of customers. So we also had a conversation going on with them. So all this happened in parallel. And I think in about 6 to 8 months, the product was, the first version was out.
Basically, you position your product in a different.
Yes, exactly.
But how many CXOs or the marketing pages let you interview before you come up with your product?
So that's when we'll have to show, some concrete mock-ups that we have worked on, right? And in many cases, they are open to talking and sharing about their issues, even if you don't have a product in hand, right?
How many people you interviewed or you surveyed before you arriving at a product?
I would say about 15 to 20 VP of sales. Definitely not if you're looking for statistical significance, definitely not. But when you're talking about understanding the user and understanding this persona, even if you talk to 15 to 20 such persons, you will see a pattern emerging.
So just going back to the question around, so you have spoken to all of these people, right? When you set up the interview, was it that you faster than each one an interview, or was there some sort of a sales angle as well? So were you pitching your product at the end of that product?
Not at all, not at all. We were not talking about, yes.
The product wasn't even brought up.
Yes. So we didn't even bring the product until the end of the conversation. It was only about understanding their pain points, understanding their challenges. Only at the end we said, this is what we are trying, and we tried to, measure their interest levels. So to give you another example, we did a similar process with a relatively smaller startup with just about 4 sales reps, and there was one VP or head of sales. So this person, he said everything is working fine for me. So in that case, when we said this is what we are coming up with, the interest levels were very low because he's not yet there. So he's not faced the problem. He's not yet ready to even see this product. So you do see such patterns, when we are talking to the same persona under different stages in the organization.
You said this particular product is being designed for the Silicon Valley, right? So how did you manage to go there and talk to the people? How's the way of engagement happened?
Right.
While interviewing, how that happened?
That's actually a big challenge, I would say. Most of our conversations happened over phone, and we had a person there who was into sales, who was also driving such conversations, and he would share the insights back to the product team. And here we tried to get inputs from fast growing startups in the B2B space in India, and those inputs were again mostly telephonic, but definitely we were able to have much more deeper conversations with them. We can go back to them if we have any questions, but if it is in Silicon Valley, definitely it was a challenge to have such detailed conversations. I wouldn't say it's difficult, but definitely it's not exhaustive.
And how many times have you gone back to the same customer segments to validate your prototypes or your next levels of development of the product?
So with our existing customers, we were showing these prototypes on how we are thinking on the lines of mission, how we are designing. We went back and forth 3-4 times when we were in the mock-up stage. So we did mostly very interactive prototypes, and then when we got into development, we know that this is exactly what the customer is happy about. So then once the product is in the beta version, we gave them access and we saw how they were using the product. And when they were using the product, we had a session with them to understand how they are navigating. Is it something that is very intuitive for them to use? So mostly on the user experience aspects, we decided after the product version 1 was there. Okay, we'll move on to the second case study. So this is from a B2C context, right? So here in this case study, we will focus on how to define the problem right. So in the previous case study, we spoke more about what sort of interview processes that we need to follow in order to gain that empathy for this user, right? So here we are going to be taking the second step and understanding how we can define the problem statement. So how many of you have seen this product before? Okay, so this is a India-based health and wellness app. So if you're looking to lose weight, you should definitely check this out. It's available on Android and iOS. So it's a comprehensive weight loss solution. So there is a free version using which you can track your calories. The app will tell you whether you're within your calorie budget, whether you're getting your carbs, proteins and fats. And as a premium version, you can also interface directly with dietitians and trainers who would come up with customized diet plans for you. So this is a complete India-based product. So, you can easily get your calories for your idlis and parathas as well. You don't have to, check out MyFitnessPal. Okay, so I started working with this team in May 2013, and the premium product at that point, so we had just launched the Android app, and the premium product had, these areas of focus. So as I said earlier, in the free version, you can type and you can say, this is what I ate and this is how the calories look like. in the premium product, you can just take a picture of your plate and send it to us. We will track the calories for you. So it kind of eliminates an additional step. So that was the positioning of this photo tracking. Second is we gave more data to the user. So we in the free version, if the user gets carbs, proteins and fats, in the premium version, he would get all micronutrients like calcium, sodium, potassium intake, etc. And a third important feature was you can interface directly with a dietitian. You can ask questions, sort of like a WhatsApp chat, where you could, say this is what I have my diet looks like, and this is what I'm looking for. So this is what the premium product looked like. So after launching the premium product, they were, we did a lot of data analysis. We spoke to multiple users, and we figured out that there were two issues that we need to address. One is there were many free users who were highly engaged. Engaged meaning they were active on the app, they were tracking their foods daily, but they were not interested in the premium version. Second was there were premium users who bought the plan, but they were not renewing the plan after a month or a 3-month plan, right? So these were the critical issues that we want to address. So when we talk about design thinking, it's not just about a new product or a new service, but you can also use design thinking across multiple areas. Be it improving your existing product or service, be it launching a new business model, be it building building a productive team. Design thinking is equally applicable across all these scenarios. So first we spoke to the highly engaged free users. You guys are, logging your foods every day. Why you're not purchasing the premium plan? What is it that's missing? So the first thing that came up was that I'm happy with free product. Whatever I want, I'm getting out of the free product. I don't see any need to upgrade. The second was I usually repeat my foods. I usually eat similar breakfast and similar lunch. Why do I need to take a picture and wait for it? Because it is a manual process. It's not like an automated photo tracking mechanism. There is a backend team that would log the food for you. So there is a delay. So why should I wait for somebody to track the foods for me? One other feedback was that reaching out to a dietitian, it's definitely a very interesting and useful feature to me, but this whole app only model is something that I'm very skeptical about. So I don't see the dietitian, I don't know who she is, and neither does she know about me. How is this whole app only model going to work? I'm not very sure. So these are, just to give you an idea of the kind of responses that we got during these interviews. Second is we also spoke to the segment of users who are our premium users, but they have not renewed the plan. So we asked them, like, you purchased the plan in the beginning, but now you're not renewing it. What happened? So many of them are extremely busy people. They are traveling, and it is an app, so they can as well easily log it even on the go, but they were not doing it. And then they said, no, it gets so boring, daily tracking my meals. Why should I do that? Then the second thing was, you're sending me so much data. What should I do with this data? Your app tells me I'm high on sodium intake, but what should I do about it? It doesn't tell me that. Second, the other important feedback was, I'm chatting with my dietitian, but she's not customizing any diet for me. So if the dietitian looks at the person's intake, she sees that the protein intake is low, and then she recommends, you should eat more channa or more rajma, right? But this person may not like such items. So how does that input comes back to the dietitian? What are the diet preferences of this person? And finally, most important, people who are looking for weight loss, they were saying, we are not seeing much progress. So why should I renew? So what do they mean by their weight loss goal? And what do they mean by progress, right? So all these are areas of concern that we need to address. So when after the interviews, we decided that our goal was to make the premium product more valuable, right? So all these insights gave us a clear indication that the premium product is not valuable. At least the users are not seeing it valuable. So how can we make it more valuable to our users? So looking at it from the problem definition standpoint, from a user segment point of view, we decided to focus only on customers who are looking for weight loss. So other customers who are maybe looking to build their muscle, or maybe who want to gain weight, or who just want to remain fit, those are our customers too, but we want to primarily focus only on customers who are looking for weight loss. The second is how to understand their need. So all the insights gave us an indication that they are looking at more personalized guidance from their dietitians and trainers. They don't want general, follow this diet plan, follow this fitness plan, but they want it to be more personalized based on their needs. Second is they want to achieve these goals. They have that goal set in mind. I want to lose 5 kgs or lose 10 kgs, but it's not fun. The app doesn't make this experience more fun, right? So these are the areas that our customers are looking for. What were the surprise insights that came during the interview process is that the app-only model, especially in India, we figured out that the trust factor is quite low, especially if you're dealing with experts like dietitians or trainers. If you're going to be completely on an app-only model where you don't know the dietitian, the trust factor is very low. Second is the premium users, though they have paid for the product, they're not logging their meals regularly or logging their workouts regularly. Without this input, the dietitian cannot recommend any improvements, right? So these were some of the insights that came during the interview. So now we know that the problem area is that the app should provide more personalized guidance, and the app should help the users achieve their weight loss targets in a much more fun and engaging manner. I'm not going to go into the details of the ideation process, but to give you a flavor of how we translated the problem definition, right? So we looked at how can we provide personalized guidance. Multiple ideas came up. To give you a sample, we decided, apart from the chats or messaging, we could also introduce Skype or phone-based communication. We need to understand the goal of the customer more clearly. If somebody says, I want to lose 5 kgs, what is his lifestyle? Does his lifestyle allow 5 kg weight loss? What is the duration he is looking for? Is he looking for some crash dieting, or is he looking to go at it slowly? We need to understand more about his lifestyle. What is, where does he stay? How does his food look like? What are the eating preferences, right? Maybe a person who likes to have non-veg, he may not like a complete veg preference, right? Similarly for workout, maybe that person doesn't like to do running, but he might be willing to try out yoga, for example. And we also need to have a team of nutritionists and trainers with those specific skills so that we can map based on the user's needs. Similarly, the second problem that we want to address was how to make this experience more fun. Maybe make it like a game, give them points if they track or if they meet certain goals. The weight loss goal is maybe say 3 months away, but can we set some intermediate targets for them, right? And can we make it like a group challenge where we group people based on say location and put them together and help them achieve a certain goal. So these were some of the ideas that we discussed, and sometime in the month of September, October time frame of the same 2013, we decided to launch a revamped version of the premium product. But it's actually, the product hasn't changed much. It is only a set of experiments. Most of the the value is driven completely and through a manual process. So when we talked about weekly targets, we said this week you're going to focus on reducing your fats intake to 20%. So that email would go out every Monday. It's a manual email, and we would monitor it from a from the backend database on how many users are reducing their fats intake, how many are not, what sort of email communication would help them to meet that goal. Maybe we can recommend them some low-fat products. So all this was executed manually. And similarly, with the gamification, we came up with a very simple points and leaderboard in the app, and we saw that the engagement, even though there was no reward associated with it. So we didn't say that if you hit so many points, you're going to get rewards. We just launched points on leaderboard and we saw that people were engaging much more than what it was before. And finally, the coaching sessions, where the coaching session with the dietitian or the trainer, we started scheduling it on a, once in 2 weeks, once in 3 weeks. We try to see which is working well with the customer. And again, this is all set up completely manually. So this kind of, set of experiments helped us to identify what is it that our premium users value. And then, the app went through multiple rounds of iterations, and now as part of this month, how the app looks like is this. So you have various plans based on what weight loss goal you are looking for, right? And as you can see, you will be communicating directly with those lifestyle coaches. They'll give you personalized consultations, customized diet and fitness plans, and you would also be part of a group coaching session. So, looking at how the product has, iterated multiple times in the last 2 years, you can see how a framework like design thinking or the identification of the problem statement, how it helped us to iterate multiple times and experiment faster.
So what are the results?
I don't work with them anymore, so I don't know the results. Yes, definitely. So it has helped them to increase the number of premium users, and we also had, set up a free trial as part of this, so that the users can experience a premium product for 7 days and then decide whether this is working or not.
So the experiments of talking to people, was this done before the initial version itself or?
Before the initial version, no. So the initial version was just, features X plus feature Y plus feature Z. So that was it was more of a feature oriented approach, just to see what is working. And then we saw that, this is not what our customers are looking for. So then we went back to the drawing board and decided what to work for the premium users. Okay, so finally on the takeaways. So if you're leaving the session, I would, really be happy if I was able to convince you on these aspects. So leverage your network. Don't think that if you want to reach out to a VP of sales or, a CEO, it's going to be tough. It's definitely not. Become friends with LinkedIn, become very comfortable with navigating through LinkedIn and connect to people, and people would introduce you to their connections and you would eventually reach out to this person. In general, everybody is very helpful irrespective of their position. They will be able to spend time with you. They will be able to, give you those insights that you're looking for. Second thing is, be prepared with a list of questions, but don't try to ensure that, you have to get answers to all. If the discussion goes off in a different direction, it's fine. Let that be an open conversation. Don't steer the direction back towards, the problems that you want to hear. Third is, people love to talk about their issues or challenges. It's not something that they are, scared about or they don't want to reveal. It's more personal. No, they are ready to talk about their issues and challenges if you project yourself as somebody who is more open, who is willing to listen and having an open mind, right? Finally, you will definitely be getting a lot of surprises and insights coming your way. And don't ignore those, though it might be completely irrelevant to the discussion. Make a note of those insights and bring it back when you are discussing your, product conceptualization stage. Finally, when we talked about identifying the problem definition, yes, it is very important that you describe the problem more accurately, but you don't have to beat yourself, to get the accurate problem statement, but make sure that it gives you some indication where, you can get a few testable hypotheses, right, which you can eventually ideate and experiment and, take it to the market. So, like to recommend some of these books. If you are going to be having such conversations, interviews with your potential customers, highly recommend this Lean Customer Development book. The author has shared a lot of practical examples and suggestions to make this interview process more useful to you. And the second book, which may not be directly relevant to this conversation, but why you should understand the customers, or why empathy is going to help you build an awesome product, right? So those aspects you can really get it from this book, which is making badass, making users awesome. It's an amazing book, lot of pictures. So whoever has read Kathy Sierra's Head First books, you would love this. And this HPR's this month's issue, September issue, is focused completely on design thinking. There are a lot of interesting articles and a very insightful interview by PepsiCo's design officer who I spoke about earlier. So, and yeah, the design thinking course as well. So if you are interested to explore more on the subject, do take time to check it out. So you can connect to me if you want to discuss further. I'm available on Twitter. You can also write to me. Yeah. Thank you.
Any questions?
Sure.
So I found myself in a situation where we're doing products for B2B and at the same time B2C. So we have set of requirements from the business customers and as well as the direct customers. So in such a situation, so who becomes the priority? So we have the final end users, but we cannot connect directly with the final end users. For us to connect directly with the final end users, the business side, they have to kind of link us together.
Right.
So who becomes the priority here?
So if I understand correctly, you're talking about
Just a typical example, right? You have institutions. Let's assume you are selling to PES University, for example, and then PES University has a student. So that kind of product. So the students have their set of requirements. PES University themselves, maybe the key user, perhaps the admission officer or the whatever department, they have their own key requirements. So sometimes we found some of those requirements overlapping each other. So the requirements from the guy and from the direct client is overlapping that of the direct the students. So in such a situation, so what do you do?
Okay. So first I would look at it, based on why this feature is being asked. So if you're looking at from a user standpoint, and then I would try to see how I can, if it is really valuable to this user, how does it link back to business goals, right? So if we are going to pitch, okay, I'm going to work on this particular feature for your end users, the criteria would be how it is going to directly impact the business goals or revenue targets, whatever it could be, growth, it could be revenue, engagement, how it is going to impact, right? So those insights you need to be prepared with before you have the conversation with your business folks, right? So that kind of gives you some idea on, because numbers definitely make a lot of sense. If you can gather some relevant insights and data points, that will help you to convince the business guys. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha. Thank you so much. I'm sure it was extremely useful for all of us. We do get to hear some of this, but I think somebody coming from their own experiences and sharing their views is always helpful for us to connect what we are learning versus what may happen once we go out of this course. So thank you everybody for staying here and joining us, those who are not part of the EMBA. We will have a tea coffee session just after this for all of us to connect with each other and talk to Anuradha as well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anuradha.